So when I was approximately 30 years old, and I don't want to get too much into the age thing because I'm getting much older, um, I started having 24/7 migraine headaches. And during that time that I was having the 24/7 migraine headaches, I ended up adding two children to our family through adoption, who were high need children. And I had already had four biological children. And my husband, I live in Montana. Currently live just outside of Billings, Montana. And at this time, I lived in Great Falls, Montana. And my husband and I were self-employed. And for those of you who know what it's like to be self-employed, you know what a load that is to carry. And because we had adopted two additional children and we felt we needed additional income, we decided to have two businesses. And so we were self-employed with two businesses, six children, and I was having 24/7 migraines. And I was running on adrenaline, and I was not taking care of myself. And I thought I was doing a great job because I was running 24/7 along with my 24/7 migraines, taking care of those businesses and my family, and making sure that those kids were where they needed to be. As a result of all of that, I dove into significant, severe suicidal depression. I knew that I was in a dangerous position, and I knew that I was surrounded by nothing but blessings, really. I had an amazing husband. I still have that amazing husband. I had wonderful children, but the pain that I was in started doing things with my thought processes. Our businesses started failing because I could not function well. And I was trying to hang on, and one of the things that triggered me in my depression was financial concerns and feeling like I wasn't adequately taking care of my family. So on one afternoon, I got phone calls from about three different bill collectors. And the last one was a woman. I couldn't even tell you who she was or what company she was from or whatever. But I tried to explain to her that I was dealing with these 24/7 migraines, and I was trying to resolve them, but I wasn't, and I wasn't able to function, and it was having an effect on my businesses. And she let me know that it was all my fault, that I made up the story about the migraines. And she basically told me that I was a horrible, despicable person. And I believed her. And so I decided that the next day I was going to take steps to end my life. because I felt like I had become an albatross to my family. If without me, I reasoned then, they would be in a better place. They wouldn't have to deal with me. They would be able to move on and be happier if I was out of the picture. So that night, I got down on my knees and said my prayers. And my relationship with God at that point, despite all of the difficulties that I experienced and was having, was very close. I won't go into it here, but God had guided me through the miraculous events in my life already, including the adoption of my 2 children from Russia. And so as I prayed to God, I did it with a very sincere heart, and I just told him that he knew and I knew that I had given this effort called my life the very best that I had to give, and I just didn't have any more. And that I couldn't handle the pain. I couldn't handle letting my family down. And so whatever he decided to do with me the next day was up to him. I hoped that he would welcome me with loving arms. But if not, if he needed to send me to hell, that was okay, because it couldn't be any worse than what I was already going through. So I climbed into bed and cried myself to sleep and successfully hid those tears from my husband. And shortly after I fell asleep, an angel appeared above my head, and he held out his arm and his hand, and I knew that he was motioning for me to grab onto it. And I did. And just so that you understand, at this point, I had done nothing to take my life. My plan had been, after everybody was gone the next day from the house while I was alone, then I would take my life. So nothing had been done at that point to end my life, or to at least attempt to end my life. But I was fully intent on doing that. And so my angel took my hand and pulled my spirit from my body and took me into a conduit. I don't know what else to call it, but it was like a tunnel, only it went through the galaxies, and the walls were clear and I could see through them, and I could see the stars and planets and everything that we were passing by. And it was beautiful, and I was always just a little bit behind my angel. But he held my hand the entire time, and I knew we were traveling at huge amounts of speed because of how fast I was seeing things go by. But I didn't have a sensation of motion like I would have had. There were no G-forces on me or anything of that sort. And the only thing that I can describe it to my family as, we tend to be actively involved in water sports. And it's like the closest I can describe to you is skiing on glass. And so if you know what it's like to ski on glass, it's like it's just smooth and you know you're traveling, but there just wasn't that um, that sensation of traveling as fast as we were. And so within a relatively short amount of time, I don't know how long it took us, but it seemed like only 5 or 10 minutes. We arrived at a complex, and I never did see the outside of the complex. I only could see the interior. And as we arrived there, my angel motioned for me to look at these classrooms. And as I looked at them, I realized that I was in a place that I had been before, that there were many things about this complex that were immediately familiar to me. And I started watching these classrooms, and there were students in the classrooms and instructors. And the classrooms were not unlike this room in that there was the seating, but they weren't classrooms that were teaching math or science or homemaking skills or anything like that. Instead, they were classrooms that were preparing us to come to this world. And I remember becoming engrossed in watching those classrooms and seeing some of the life experiences explained that different people could have. And each classroom shared information on what a particular experience might be like. So for some, it might be, what would it be like to have cystic fibrosis? Or what would it be like to have cancer? Or what would it be like to be born to a mother who could not love you? And the interesting thing about these classrooms was that we were not really very concerned at all. In fact, I saw no concern whatsoever about whether we would be rich, whether we would be famous, whether we would be healthy, whether we would not. It wasn't the kinds of criteria that we might use if we were here in mortality and given the opportunity to design our life. It wasn't like, okay, I want a mansion, I want a ranch. Those of us that live in Montana, that might be on our list. I want this amazing career in fill in the blank. That was not our concern. Our concern in those classes was what would help us learn the most? What would help us become more like God? What would help us grow in our ability to love? And so as I watched all of that, I became so engrossed in what I was watching and being reminded of that my angel had to get my attention again, and he motioned for me to look to my left. And as I looked to the left, I saw another room, and it wasn't a classroom, and there was just one individual in that class, or wasn't a class, but in that room. And I don't know how it was done. I don't know the heavenly technology involved. But as I looked at those classrooms and as I looked at that room that the individual was in, the walls would just melt away. I could see through those walls and see everything that was going on, and I could hear everything that was going on. And as I looked to that room, I knew that I was seeing my Father in heaven. I was seeing God. And I was so amazed at how well I knew him as he stood there, and his back was towards me at that point. And I knew who he was, his outline, his physical characteristics, if you will, were so familiar to me that even turned around, I knew who he was. And as I watched him, I could see that he was watching the door to that room, and that he could see through those walls and that door too, just like I could. I could tell that he could see who was coming in the hallway, and there was two individuals approaching the doorway to that room, a man and a woman. And he saw them approaching, and he started moving towards the door to open the door for them. And as he opened the door, I saw who those individuals were. And they were me and my now husband, Greg. And we had come to that room for a meeting with God. And I knew at that point that Greg and I had, that plans were already in place, that we would be together here in this world. And as I saw all of that, my memory, if you will, of that existence was completely restored. I was able to see myself in that existence and to remember all of the experiences that I had ever had throughout what I can only describe as an eternity. I saw my interactions with other individuals. I saw gatherings with maybe some of you. I don't know if it was just my family. I didn't have what I would say was, I don't know that there's a typical near-death experience, but so many people are greeted, I know, by their loved ones. And I never had that greeting because my experience wasn't an experience of crossing and then being told I had to go back. Instead, it was an experience of helping me understand why I was here in the first place. And as I watched and remembered all of that existence, I was so amazed at the love that was so prevalent there, that was just all encompassing, and how very different every single one of us was, and yet how how much honor we had for each other, how much respect, how much desire we had to help each other succeed. It was just the most amazing, inspiring scene. And as I share in my book, I call it the most amazing reunion I've ever had. And the reunion was with myself. I saw how amazing I was. And I don't mean to say that in any way that would be construed as egotistical or arrogant. When I was reunited with my memories of myself, I was able to see all that I knew and understood, all that I had done, all that I had been involved with, all of the knowledge and intelligence that I had. And it was mind-blowing. It was literally mind-blowing. And the wonderful thing is that every single one of us there were mind-blowing. I wasn't the star student. We were all star students. And the only difference was that we were all unique, just like we are now. And we all had certain talents and certain abilities or certain strengths. And we did have weaknesses there, but we just honored each other and we loved each other. And it was totally inspiring. And so somehow my angel knew what was going on with me, apparently knew when my memories were restored, knew what I was seeing, knew what I was experiencing. And he had to get my attention again and direct me back to the room. And as I entered the classroom with my now husband, Greg, he wasn't my husband then, I then began to experience that entire experience, both beside my angel for a time and as though I were right there in the room with God again, reliving what I knew had already taken place. And I knew as I was re-experiencing it, this was an experience I had had prior to coming to Earth. I knew I was being allowed to relive an experience I had already had prior to being born on this earth. And so as we entered the room, God gave each of us a hug that was just the best thing ever. And I was just wanted to melt into his chest and to stay there. And there were just 2 chairs in the room. And God directed us to come to those chairs, and he motioned for Greg to stand beside me, or stand behind me rather, and he had me sit down in one of the chairs, and he sat down in the other chair. And somehow I knew that Greg was aware of the reason for this meeting, and that he had been a part of whatever it was that this meeting was about. And as I sit down, Greg began to rub my shoulders, and yes, I know that it was my spirit, but my experience there as a spirit was that our spirit bodies worked just like our physical bodies. They seemed like solid matter to me. And he started rubbing my shoulders, and I knew him very well in that existence. And I knew that he was cueing me that something important was about to be discussed, and that he was trying to reassure me that everything would be okay. And so after sitting down, God took my hands, and he was sitting very close to me, almost knee to knee. And he held my hands very gently, and he looked into my face. And as I looked into his, I was looking at a face that I knew so well. And for a brief moment, I was able to look at him with my mortal understanding and see his face. And I couldn't help but wonder how I had forgotten, how I had been able to forget his face. He had the most perfect, loving, amazing face. And it wasn't because he was like some Mr. Adonis that I couldn't say that he was the best looking individual I'd ever seen. It didn't matter what his features were. He was perfect. And as I looked at him, I was just so amazed. I had always believed here in mortality that the separation between heaven and earth was not very solid, for lack of a better word. It just seemed like so many of the experiences that I'd had in mortality that separation between heaven and earth just seemed really thin, like so close together at times. And as I looked at God's face, I knew that wall between my memories of that existence and my ability to remember as a woman on earth had to have been made of many hundreds of feet thick stainless steel or something so solid, because I couldn't believe that I had been able to forget. And the God that I looked upon was my personal friend, besides being my actual father. And he was completely and totally and utterly perfect. There was nothing absent from him. There was not anything that he did not know. There was nothing he did not comprehend. There was no positive quality that he did not have in perfect form. And so God then began to tell me about the reason that I had been requested, or that we had been requested to come to this meeting with him. He explained to me that he had a mission for me to accomplish. He explained to me that it would be very difficult and that there would be a lot involved, and that he would understand if I chose to refuse the mission. But he shared with me exactly what that would entail. And as he did so, I no longer observed the meeting beside my angel. I only began to experience it completely just from the chair. And God motioned for me to look back through the conduit that my angel had brought me through. And as I looked back through the conduit, instead of seeing vast galaxies, it was like I was able to see Earth as though it was just a short distance away. And I was able to see my life as it would occur if I chose to accept that mission. And there was a condition on that. I understood that what I was saying was not only my mission, but the mission as it would occur, my life as it would occur, as long as I relied on God's guidance throughout my life. And I knew that as I looked at those scenes that were being presented to me, and there wasn't anything left out, it was completely detailed. That existence was not about keeping details from us and surprising us here later. It was about revealing everything and making sure that we were making choices with a full understanding. And so I knew that if at any time during my life and mortality that I chose to rebel against God or just walk away from his guidance, that things about what I was saying would change. I wasn't given every scenario or shown any other alternative scenarios. I was only shown what my life would look like if I chose to use God's guidance. And as I did so, there were things that I saw that really gave me concern. And that wasn't a typical reaction there. I think I could comfortably say that in that existence, because we were surrounded by God's love and without the kind of adversarial experiences like we have here in this world, I had a high level of confidence, and I had a high level of belief in my abilities, especially when I knew that God was helping me. And again, I haven't been allowed to remember what I saw of my life here. Obviously, at my age, I have a pretty good idea of some of those things now that I saw. But something, or maybe several somethings, I'm not sure, made me question my ability to successfully accomplish the mission I was being asked to accept. And God could read my thoughts, and he knew what I was thinking. And he reassured me. He said, I would never ask you to accept a mission that I thought you would fail at. He reminded me, of course, that he wasn't about trying to see if he could create a scenario, and this, I'm using my own words, but a scenario of failure. He was about helping us grow, but more importantly, helping us succeed. And he gently squeezed my hand and he said, remember, as long as you remember me, you will succeed. And as I contemplated there for however long it was, he needed to remind me 2 or 3 more times, but he kept telling me, remember, as long as you remember me, you will succeed. And I realized that he was right. Whatever I was being asked to accept wasn't going to be easy. In fact, it was going to be very difficult, and God knew that it was going to be very difficult. But as long as I remembered him, as long as I used his guidance, I would succeed. And so I told him that I would accept that mission. And he squeezed my hands again. And he said, thank you. And he said, you have chosen correctly. And he then stood up, and I knew that the meeting essentially had come to a conclusion. And before we left to go to leave the room, he gave me another hug. And from that point, I was returned to my body. And I don't remember the trip back. And I have not been allowed to remember a lot of what I saw or was allowed to remember then when my full memory was restored. But what I have been allowed to remember was how it felt. I've been allowed to remember how I felt as I watched those classrooms. I've been allowed to remember how I felt as I was with those other spirits and the atmosphere of love and honor and praise that we had for each other. I've been able to remember how I felt about myself as I was reunited with those memories. I've been allowed to remember certain things about my husband, which I won't share here. And I haven't been allowed to remember what God's face looks like, but I have been allowed to remember how I felt as I looked upon his perfect face and was in his perfect presence. And that's it.
Thank you, JoAnna, for being here, sharing your story. Couple of questions. When you say God, was this the Heavenly Father God, or was it Jesus?
It was Heavenly Father God.
And how much your pain since? And do you know what your mission was?
So when I returned to my body, I returned to a body still depressed, still having 24/7 migraines. At that point, I ended up having 24/7 migraines approximately another 4, maybe 5 years. My husband was given divine guidance. This is a theme in our lives. None of you know me very well, but there's been several instances, and my husband was essentially told to go back to school. He did, became a chiropractor. While we were at school again, they were able to determine the cause of my migraines, which was MSG.
In your mission?
My mission is multifaceted. I am to share my story. I am to share that we all have a team of angels assisting us. We often talk about a guardian angel. I guess I should add that after my near-death experience, it seemed strange to me that my angel that came and took me from my body never looked at me head on, never looked at me face to face, always kept away from me. And so I made it a matter of prayer and found that my angel was my paternal grandfather. And in fact, my cousin Bruce is here. We shared the same grandpa. And my grandpa Weeks was very much a father figure in my life as I was growing up. And so it made perfect sense to me then why he kept his face away from me. I would have recognized him. And if I would have recognized him, he would not have been able to show me what he needed to show me. And so as the rest of my mission, there's a lot. I have 2 children that we adopted from Russia who have reactive attachment disorder. I feel like I am to help facilitate healing for children who have rough beginnings and their families, because they end up being, their families, adopted, foster, etc., end up being victims of those children's abuse. And I'm very involved in healing, but more from a natural standpoint, getting to the cause of an issue rather than medicated.
Did you gain any insights about special needs people? It sounds like your adopted children or special needs in their own way. And I'm just making a question more generally about Down syndrome and
Well,
what their role is to play.
so children with reactive attachment disorder are not like a Down syndrome child. They have emotional issues. And well, I don't know exactly how to best to explain it, but what happens with a child that has reactive attachment is that they are not given the nurturing during those months of a infant's life that they generally bond to their mother or their primary caretaker. And as a result, they cannot form truly loving reciprocal relationships. And you would think that in this world, we all have had difficult experiences. We've had our heart broken. We try to protect those hearts, right? Because we don't like that pain. But the real reality is that when we keep ourselves from being vulnerable, from being able to love and be loved fully, we miss out on the purposes of life. We miss out on being able to fully express love and be loving and serving towards each other.
Right. One of the things you mentioned when you were in heaven was you would have God's guidance. How, when you came back, living your life, that you stayed connected to God's guidance?
I am fine-tuned into the power of prayer. I have found it to not be just this humdrum, methodical experience devoid of anything but just routine verbiage. For me, prayer is my lifeline. And I have very personal conversations with God all the time. And I've learned to listen because sometimes the answers to my prayer comes through events, but a lot of times they come through thoughts or reminders or impressions or just I'm sure you've had a sporadic idea that just kind of hits you and it's like, huh, I pay attention to those. I don't consider them sporadic thoughts at all. I honestly do believe that each of us, if we allow them, can and are surrounded by a team assisting us as much as we will allow heaven to assist us. I mean, everything that I saw in heaven, for lack of a better word of wherever it was I was taken, never at any time ever were we absent of the ability to choose. The ability to choose was always there, always consistent, and it remains so here. And so I know that if I decide that, hey, I've got this, I know this better than you, it's like, that's what I would call a stupid moment. Because I made what I have revealed to me and personally often seems well beyond my ability or sometimes beyond my understanding or just doesn't seem to make sense with what I do understand. But every time I follow that guidance, I hit it right on.
For some of us, that are straight off the straight and narrow, I'm not talking about anybody else, just myself. It seems like it's worked out. Do you think that he knew that I would stray and come back, or?
I think he has a full understanding of you better than you know yourself. I think he knows all of us better than we know ourselves. So, yes, I think he knew, but I also think that he knew your propensity for turning things around with his help.
My question would be, first of all, we hear a lot about love, do we not?
Yes,
And I think about it. I'd like, how would you define it? Why is love so important?
oh, sorry.
So I guess the question would be how would you define love?
I think I would define love as the ability to put myself aside and serve both God and my fellow man. As much as I believe in love and as much as I know that love is important, one of the things that I didn't mention that I did see as my memories were reunited, I saw what I believe was the war in heaven, which didn't look like a combat war. It was a debate, is what I saw. And I saw those presenting their opinions, trying to convince one way or the other. One of the things that I've dealt with personally with my children with reactive attachment disorder, a lot of us in mortality think that, well, if you just love somebody more, that will overcome everything. It doesn't. If just pure love overcame everything, then that debate would never have happened in heaven. And my children would not still have the issues they have because they have been loved greatly, not perfectly, but they've been loved greatly. And so the ability to love is also the ability, I think, to open our hearts and to see beyond what we see as what we want or what we need, and to always be looking for the greater good for everybody around us, those we love, those that we share communities with. I think that when we are all looking out for each other, if that's what we would do, if I could love you as much as you love me, and we both cared so much about each other that we just did everything possible to help each other succeed in this life, and then multiply that by this room, and then multiply that by this city and this country and this world, we would have an amazing utopian society.
Question from online. They asked, what was your husband's response, and how long was it until you told him about your experience?
So I told my husband probably about 24 to 48 hours after my experience. And, you know, I am blessed not only to be married to my best friend, but to be married to a man that is incredibly in sync and intuitive. He just knows when I'm sharing something important with him. And he knows me, I guess. And so when I shared with him what had happened, he knew I was sharing the truth, and he was very receptive to it. He's been very supportive. I will say that it wasn't the first time that I had had an experience. It was my first near-death experience, but it wasn't my first experience with dealing with communications with heaven. So both my husband and I, as newlyweds, saw our children prior to their being born, 5 of the 6. And so there's a lot of background there, but he's only ever been supportive.
The gentleman that just asked online was asked the same question that I was going to ask, but the second question about that was he aware of your desperation in your plan to end your life before this event?
He was aware that I was suffering from severe depression. And when I began the process of planning how I was going to end my life, which was well before that night that I was taken from my body, when I had picked out what I was going to wear, something went off inside of me that's like, you have to let somebody know. And so I went to one of my religious leaders and shared that I had become suicidal, because as close as I am to my husband, I, at that point, really didn't know how to communicate that. But immediately my husband then became aware that I was suicidal. Our children became aware that I was suicidal, and they knew that I was severely depressed and that I was fighting for my life. I was then active in therapy to help me through that. But after that phone call with that bill collector, that just kind of sent things tumbling.
So I have 2, they're kind of separate with, you said with the guardian angels, so do you find that they are all family related to you?
Some of them I know that they are. And in my particular situation, I believe that there are some, I don't know how they're related or even, if they really would be considered, I mean, in the theoretical sense, we're all related, right? But there are individuals that I know that are assisting me from the other side of the veil that had similar missions in this life that they're still working on by helping me. Does that make sense?
Yes. Which leads also kind of into the second, were you given guidance, because you talked about coming back into the flesh that was imperfect and still depressed, so were you given guidance into overcoming the depression so that you could continue your mission?
Yes, but the thing that you need, if I know that lots of us go through depression, I don't know how many get to the severity of depression that I was in. But it came in bits and pieces, and it wasn't this explosion of revealed knowledge to me. In fact, probably the very most important thing that happened to help me was my husband's guidance to go back to school and become a chiropractor, because all of my efforts to seek medical treatment ended in a friend of mine who was also my personal neurologist telling me it was all in my head and I needed therapy. Because no migraine medicine worked on me at all, not even shots of the Imitrex. So, allopathic medicine, MDs, they're trained to treat symptoms with medications. I needed to get to the root cause of my migraines, which the team of chiropractors who agreed to help to work with me once my husband became a student, they're the ones I can credit for helping me find my answers.
So did you have people, as you were improving and getting healthier and etc., did you have people that attributed your story as something made up within that?
Surprisingly, nobody has, and I anticipated that. In fact, I was commanded by God to write the book that I did, and I was pretty intimidated by the prospect of sharing my story, because I didn't know about ions at the time. I didn't know that others had had similar type experiences, and I just thought the moment I even send this manuscript to a publisher or whoever, they're gonna call me kooky lady, and that was gonna be the end of that effort. But I've been blessed in that people have recognized that my story is real and genuine.
Right here, you mentioned that there was a classroom and learning going on and things being presented that might be experienced down here by people. Do you think that that learning allowed us then, when we were we presented all of us presented with the opportunity to say, yes, we'll do that, or no, we won't? Do you think?
Yeah. So, I know it's hard to believe sometimes, but what I was shown was not just one classroom, but multiple classrooms, covering a diverse amount of subject matter. And now, as I walk through this life, sometimes I feel like I'm muddling more than I'm walking. I see some of the experiences that I have or that family members have. For example, 3 years ago, December, my oldest daughter lost her husband to a heart attack at the age of 43. And he left her with 6 children to raise. And, you know, in moments when you're seeing a loved one having to struggle through such a difficult, ongoing situation, it's like, really? Did she choose that? Did he choose that? And I believe the answer is yes. But I think it's because we were not choosing experiences. We weren't picking up the vacation of choice, right? We were picking a learning experience.
I recently listened to another experience of someone who has pre-birth memories. And one thing that they said was that we choose, so they, very hard things, and that he had seen some glorious being, just glorious, and this was before he had come and had an earth experience. And just like, how do I get to be like, what can I do? What can I do? And he's like, this is really hard. I don't think you want to do it. No, what, I will do anything. What, I want to be like where you are. And so he said, well, I had a chronic illness, and so I chose that. So this idea he gave was like choosing to climb Mount Everest. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. Like, there's so many people who choose to pay and then go on this arduous experience, and it was their choice. And then I think maybe of a lesser mountain, you could maybe hop in a helicopter and get to the summit. Versus choosing the hard route by Mount Everest and the learning experience you took. But I guess my question is, did you have any sense of choosing these things for that type of a purpose? Because
Yes.
there's this next glorious level, that's why
Yeah.
I would choose something hard, even maybe not knowing.
So probably one of the things that I didn't explain very well, and maybe not at all, is that we loved God, our Father, beyond ways that I have mortal words to explain. We loved him and wanted so much to be like him. And in ways that I don't completely comprehend, this life assists us in that endeavor of becoming like our Father in heaven. And we knew that experiences that we had here were going to be difficult. And I do think that some of us, in our passion to become like our Father in heaven, might have chosen incredibly difficult experiences. And I don't fully comprehend that process. I just know that we did choose, and it wasn't uninformed decisions. We were given a lot of information, and even though, you know, in this, as a mortal person, it's hard for me to comprehend how, as a non-mortal being, that I could have comprehended what this was going to be like. And maybe to a degree I couldn't completely comprehend, but I do know that God's ability and his perfection would have and did provide us everything that was possible to understand.
So kind of with the same thing you were just talking about, so do you truly believe that there's a statement that you've probably heard this before, what kills you makes you stronger.
What doesn't kill me makes me stronger,
Yeah, what
right?
doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But so my question is, do you truly believe that we in the pre-existence, which I believe in the pre-existence, that we did make the choices and that God knew what we were gonna go through, and up there, we made the decision, we would rather come down here and go through all of these troubles that we might go through, or go on the Satan side and just not have to go through it all, and just have an easy life, because there's a lot of people that are down here right now that seem to have a very easy life, everything goes good, they don't have migraine headaches, they don't have financial problems, they don't have all these troubles that you can have down here, they don't have a lot of their family died in some crazy accident or something. You think that we chose to go into those, the dark days that we may go through, that we already knew that we would have to go through those?
I do. And I know it's hard to comprehend because, they're hard. They're agonizing. They're, even after I came back from my near-death experience, still having the depression and still having the 24/7 migraines, I knew I could not ever even begin to consider to take my life. But at the same time, it was so agonizingly hard until I got the answers, to the cause of my headaches to hold on. And when I did get the answers and I was able to remove MSG from my system completely, not surprisingly, not only did my headaches go away, so did my depression. So my depression was caused to a very great extent by the constant 24/7 pain I was in.
Okay, I'm curious about the clothing you saw in the classrooms and in heaven, including your angel, your husband, God. What were they wearing? Was it colorful like in this room?
So, my grandfather was in a robe. I honestly don't remember what anybody else was wearing. I don't remember what I was wearing. I don't remember what anybody else was wearing. And I've read several near-death experiences where they just describe gardens and lush green and all these brilliant colors. I do not remember seeing a lot of color, and my experience again was not really to experience heaven. It was to experience, to be reminded that I accepted the mission that I am supposed to accomplish here. And it may be slightly to do with the fact that in mortality, I am colorblind. I have what they call green-blue color blindness. And so I don't talk colors generally now anyway. And so it probably just was not made an important part of my experience.
Thank you so much. I appreciate how you shared the power of words. Whether it came from a lady on the phone with your darkest moment and you were depressed, whether someone hears an evil spirit encouraging them to take their life, words are so powerful. Sometimes it's the very thing that holds somebody on. And I really appreciate the power of Heavenly Father's words when he said, "You have chosen." And I love that he reaffirmed the collegiancy with his words. My father in heaven knew that I would be given a choice. My husband did take his life. And so he had suicide 4 years ago.
I'm sorry.
And in this journey, I remember telling my father, "Father, I believe in miracles. Why? Why did this happen? Why is this going to happen?" But I know angels can intercept. So grateful an angel did come and take me from their body. And I heard him speak then. And he said the words, "You promise." And then I realized, you're right. We all have an opportunity to have a life moving. and were given to him. And he had to remind me in the darkest moment that there was a lesson, that there was a promise made. My question is that when you actually contemplated and had heard that experience, having had a little time in between, when the angel came, were you asleep?
Yes,
You were awake?
no, I was asleep.
You were asleep. So were you awakened out of the sleep? Or you
Yes.
were asleep?
I don't think my physical body was awakened. I feel like it was my spirit was spoken to. If that makes sense, so. My spirit self became aware of the angel. My grandpa being there, reaching out for my hand.